Welcome back to another episode of Please Call Me Crazy, brought to you by Free People Radio and powered by our favorite sponsor, TireGet.com. That's TireGet.com. You have to buy tires from somebody, you might as well buy them from us. Help fund the movement, help support the movement. We believe in the freedom of movement, and that's exactly what the establishment wants to take from you now. I'm your host, Royce White, here in the belly of the beast, Minneapolis, Minnesota, and you are watching episode 217. Today is Wednesday, October 2nd, year of our Lord 2024. Day after the debate, we're going to talk about the debate between vice presidential candidate uh, Tim Walz, Wuhan Waltz, I'm calling him, and vice presidential candidate J.D. Vance. A lot of interesting things to take away from that debate, and we're going to get into that and much more, as well as, it's been so long since I've been here. Obviously, you can hear my voice. I'm coming over a little virus or a bug, some type of sickness. Maybe I had COVID, maybe I didn't. Maybe I got the next virus coming. Maybe I got the old one. Who knows these days? I don't really know. But we sometimes you got to take a couple of days, let your body heal, let your body rest. And so that's why I didn't do the podcast last week. Was starting on Wednesday of last week, so I'm just coming out of that spell. But the week before that, we had already put a little halt to the podcast because we're doing some branding things to help the podcast be more visible. And shortly, in the very near future, we're going to go back to the weekly schedule we were trying to keep up with before the campaign got up and running. The Senate campaign got up and running. So what we were doing before was Monday I do a deep dive on a topic. Wednesday I would do news, headlines, current stories, and whatnot. We're probably going to turn the Wednesday show into a reaction show. So the whole hour and a half will be a reaction to clips and videos. Doesn't have to be current necessarily, but it'll be a reaction episode so that I can chop that up and turn it into smaller reaction videos so that we can try and grow the channel by putting out content through different mediums. And Friday still stay the same as be our family and friends guest episode. A lot of times we'll have Professor Penn. Sometimes Professor Penn and I will have a guest, and sometimes I'll interview a guest on my own. Sunday, we are going to add a Sunday show. I'm not sure exactly which week we're going to do this, but stay tuned. If you see a Sunday show, it's probably going to be the next time. If you see a Sunday show, the next time you see a Sunday show, sometimes I put a Sunday show up just because something's so, on my mind that I just got to talk about it. And it just ends up being on a weekend and I post premiered on Sundays. But we're actually going to go to a scheduled weekly Sunday show where I do a call-in show. So if you're out there and you want to be a part of the call-in show, make sure you stay tuned for more information and updates about the Sunday show. We want everybody calling in, whether you're fan, foe, whether you're friend, whether you love, hate, doesn't matter. We want people calling into the show because that's going to make a good show. So I want to announce that before we get started here today. Day after the debate, and I just got to say, and excuse me today if I'm a little offbeat. I got a bunch of different allergy medicine and cold medicine and Mucinex and, all kinds of stuff going on. Probably not the best for me, but some of it does give you some symptomatic relief, allows you to sleep. The biggest thing when you get sick, let's just talk about this first since I'm struggling with the nasal struggling with the nasal here. One of the biggest things people have to realize about coming down with a virus, most viruses, cold, influenza A, influenza B, strep, COVID, whatever the case may be. I've had all of them. Actually, I haven't had strep in a long time. Pneumonia, some of them you need some antibiotics, obviously. Strep throat, you're probably going to need antibiotics, although some people do pass strep throat naturally. I wouldn't take my chances with it. I've known people who had strep throat and let it get too far along and ended up having sepsis, right? And had to be hospitalized for it. So I wouldn't take my chances if you have strep throat. and again, this isn't medical advice for the YouTube censors out there. This is just my own personal experience. Although I do have very close personal relationships with a lot of doctors who have saved a lot of lives. So we'll add that uh, add that to it. Um, Strep, though, you got to get antibiotics. That's usually the right route. Pneumonia, sometimes viral, run its course. Bacterial, definitely want to get antibiotics. Don't play around with bacteria pneumonia. That'll take you out. As far as viral infections go, other than that, cold, influenza A, B, viral pneumonia. Biggest thing is usually your sleep. Yeah, people's bodies aren't able to heal up because they're not able to get adequate rest. Usually it's the symptoms that keep your body from getting adequate rest. Whatever that reaction is, whether it's your airways being inflamed or headache or, nasal congestion, aches and pains, a lot of times fever, give you just general body aches and pains and malaise. Those things keep people from getting adequate rest. The rest is how your body resets and heals. And things can get worse or be worse for you if you're unable to get rest. This is why the Dr. Pierre Corey protocol, the FLCC, if I'm not mistaken. Again, a little bit of medication going on today, but the FLCC has a protocol, and one of the things that have been constant on their protocol is melatonin. Why? Melatonin is a way to help encourage sleep, REM sleep, and it's worked wonders for me. Benadryl is also another one that can help. Why? The antihistamines actually uh, forcefully turn off the receptors that cause inflammation in the airways and in other places where those viruses usually cause a lot of reaction. And the reaction is actually your immune system trying to fight what's going on. But sometimes that immune response can be so strong that it gives you symptoms that don't allow you to actually get the rest you need to. So it's a complex ecosystem, the body. But usually the body does well to fight off the things it needs to fight off. Myself, melatonin, elderberry, zinc, vitamin C, D, um, honey, water, Gatorade, keeping yourself, hydrated. Chicken noodle soup, good old bone broth chicken noodle soup. I like to put a little bit of rice in my chicken noodle soup. I like to make it wild man soup. Make it really hearty with some rice and extra vegetables and things like that. And quercetin. And yes, I popped a few ivermectin the other day. It was 2 days in a row. I took two ivermectin, and I started. Ironically, could be placebo. I don't know. I'm not a medical expert. I'm not an epidemiologist by any means, but I definitely felt a significant difference after I took two ivermectin. Just going to say that. The Benadryl also helped. Benadryl helped, kind of clear things out and whatnot. So, there's my short on me being sick and some of the things that I do when I'm sick. Um, Takeaway from the debate, and I'd be lying if I didn't say that I was pretty frustrated and worried for the American people, for our country. Reason being, it has nothing to do with the debate or what happened in the debate. Really, I mean, it more has to do with what I watched before the debate and the lead up because I took a little bit of time to peek into what the mainstream media was saying in the lead up to the debate because that's a big part of the narrative, right? And you can hear and you can see how the narrative is being shaped by the institutions if you tune in to the pre-debate coverage on the mainstream outlets. So I was disturbed by what I saw there. I was disturbed by what I saw after the debate. I was disturbed by the I was disturbed and I'm constantly disturbed by what I see online. And again, we don't know how much of it's real, how much of it's fake. I mean, we do live in a society where the sheer size of the society makes it hard to really pin down and know what any large majority, what any majority actually feels one way or another, right? I mean, we kind of rely upon things like elections, let's say, or small sample sizes of data collection and polling to tell us what we know about any sizable demographic of people. And when you get to the size of the entire country, I mean, the United States of America is a very big country with a lot of people, not the biggest country, but there's a lot of people that live in this country. And it's hard to really tell what people are thinking. Now, social media has provided a platform where we are given insight into sort of how people think on the surface, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's what they actually think. And then you have the other layer where we don't know how many people on social media are fake or not, how many repeat accounts you have, and how many bots. And we already seen footage where in parts of China there are companies that have very young adults, maybe even teenagers, in a room with multiple cell phones lined up a wall connected to one keyboard, and they're flooding out information all at once because why wouldn't you, right? We are in an information war, and people are going to use every advantage that they possibly can. So it's very hard to know what people think, but there are certain things that I myself can say because I've experienced it now firsthand. So these are firsthand accounts of being on a campaign trail all across the state of Minnesota, being playing in the big three and traveling all across the country and meeting people in person. So this isn't what I'm talking about right now, and what I'm going to talk about right now isn't just something that I'm seeing on the internet. It's something that's reflected on the internet that I have further evidence of because of personal in my personal in-person experience with real living people. And that being said, I'm very, very worried about the future of this country. And lately, all I've been doing outside of certain specific things, events such as the presidential debates or some current news, what I've mostly been going back and watching is Firing Line with William F. Buckley. If you follow me on X, you'll see that I've been posting a lot of Firing Line debates or conversations. And it's really the only thing that interests me, and it's because of the level of the discourse, the intellectual level and gravitas of the discourse on any side of an issue. I mean, it wasn't partisan. It wasn't an echo chamber. In fact, the whole idea of Firing Line was that William F. Buckley was a very precise intellectual investigator, and he understood how to frame a question and how to take the nuance of life, of being human, of consciousness, and peel back different perspectives of a single question. And with that skill, he could interview almost anybody, and he created an environment of very tough interviews. I wish he was still alive today and that he was still doing Firing Line today, because I think the PBS version now of Firing Line with Margaret Hoover is a absolute uniparty, mainstream media tragedy, to be honest. It pales in comparison to William F. Buckley. And now you could say, oh well, William F. Buckley is a once in a generation mind, and that is certainly the case. But I'd say there's more to what Firing Line on PBS has become. Many people might not even know that Firing Line is still on PBS, but there's an entire Firing Line series that you can access on YouTube that is as recent as a couple of weeks ago. So I think Hillary Clinton was on recently, as a matter of fact. And, I saw a person on there like George Conway was on there recently, and a bunch of other, permanent political class shills is what it was. But anyway, I think somebody like Jordan Peterson, for example, would be an incredible host for a modern day Firing Line. And he's already doing his own thing. So less than likely that he'd take up a role like that. But neither here nor there. If you go back and you watch the old versions of Firing Line, it is some of the most intellectually rich discourse that I've come across. And sure, you can read certain things, and obviously there's no substitute for reading. But if you're talking about in person, live, back and forth, real dialogue, go watch Firing Line. And it's a great history lesson as well, because it uh it provides context to what the prominent thought leaders of a given perspective across the political spectrum were saying at key moments in American history, such as when Kennedy was killed, or when the civil rights movement happened, or during the '80s during the Reagan administration, and the '90s during the Rodney King beatings, and so there were all these key markers in his times in history, these key moments in history, and you really get a look at how the conversation took place and how it evolved and how it built on itself across time. It's a very, very insightful place to go and watch content. So if you haven't already, and you would like to see some of what your host here on Please Call Me Crazy is looking at lately, it's a lot of Firing Line with William F. Buckley, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. Some of what I've uncovered there in a moment. But the reason I bring that up in the first place is because what has me so discouraged and so worried about the future of our country is just the base level of intellectual currency in our society. It's just bankrupt. I mean, I challenge anybody to go watch one 50-minute episode of Firing Line and come back and watch any mainstream media outlet, or any political discourse for the most part today, and you'll see that there is just a significant difference in the type of care and precision that we as a society have for our discourse. There's just a lack of intellectual substance, uh, discipline, commitment, honesty. I mean, it's just as I mean, now going back and watching it, it wakes me up in the middle of the night sometimes. I wake up in the middle of the night and I think to myself, man, I hope I don't sound as dumb as I feel people sound juxtaposed to what I'm listening to on a daily basis. And I have a lot of people who compliment me and say, every time I go and speak somewhere, they go, "Oh man, you smart, intelligent. We appreciate you, articulate, and we learn something, and we're thankful that you're doing what you're doing. Win, lose, or draw, we're thankful, and we want you to keep going because the country needs people like you, and that feels good." But as an athlete, I'm self conscious. I still I still challenge myself and measure myself against the best of the best, and I think to myself, man, I got to start to sharpen and hone the discourse, and the only way I can help do that is some ways is to point back to the predecessors and show what I feel was the high level of discourse uh, throughout history. And again, I reference that because I don't really think I don't think there's any appetite for that today in our society. I really don't. I mean, I ask myself, watching the debate, watching NBC and MSNBC, and going across the state of Minnesota and speaking to different people, I ask myself, how is it that people have even come to believe what they're being told? I mean, I get the fundamental of how it worked. I get the fundamental of how it happens, right? Because media has become such a big machine with so much influence and so much reach and so much precise reach that it's hard to escape it. I mean, it's like an infinity of information and control on the narrative. So I understand how it works, but I have to say my uh my compassion and lenience is withering on the branch, so to speak. I'm getting much more contemptuous of people who have been gullible in this sense, because um I ask myself how, how is it that people are, and what really frustrates me, what really worries me the most is when you ask yourself a question, if you're honest intellectually, when you ask yourself a question, you start to answer it. And when I go down any number of answers, any number of roads that lead to an answer, I don't like any of the answers. I don't like any of the answers to the question. Yet I wouldn't dare pretend that those answers aren't possible. I wouldn't dare pretend that those aren't the answers. And that's what leaves you with discouragement is when you finally arrive, when you go through that thought process and you arrive at the end of the road and that answer is an answer you don't like, but you know that it's real. That is the place where intellectual honesty and integrity lives. Now, what I think a lot of people have done is they shield themselves from that dark part of the road when it comes to everyone else first, but also then when it comes to themselves because it's a habitual practice. And it's like, well, I don't want to think the worst of anybody else. Well, that's probably a reflection of you not wanting to think the worst about yourself as well. And I think a lot of what we see is, does fall into that, that category. Um, because some of the answers I think of right away are, um, first and foremost, people's lives are so convenient they don't want the truth. It's just plain. They're not interested in the truth. Let's just start there. They're not even really interested in the truth. They're interested in whatever relative truth makes their life more convenient. And that's not honest whatsoever. That's a lack of sacred. That is a profound lack of sacred honor, is what that is. The second thing is that the truth is too ugly, right? That they can't handle the truth. Right? So you got, I'm not even interested in the truth. I can't handle the truth. And then, when I say can't handle the truth, it's like the truth is too wounding to my psyche. The truth is too wounding to my spirit. The truth is too wounding to, whatever preconceived reality I've created in my life. So I can't handle the truth. I'm emotionally, psychologically, spiritually too weak to be able to confront the truth. Um, and then you have something more, I'd say, deceptive and dishonest, where it's the truth is malleable. Doesn't really matter what the truth is. I'll bend the truth. I'll intentionally, consciously bend the truth to whatever I need it to be to continue on living the way that I want to live. All pretty dark answers. All paint a very clear picture of how we got to where we are today, where uh, people are just lying. I mean, they're just flat out lying. It's blatant. The lies are blatant, and you ask yourself, how does any sizable majority of people actually believe this stuff? And again, I get it. I mean, I get it. I understand, and I'm only asking the question because I've been there myself, right? I was actually the kid at 18 years old that had this profound loyalty to Nike because when you're a young black man and you come up out of the ghetto and your life's dream is to be an NBA player, and you finally get invited to the shoe brand that gave birth to the Michael Jordan commercial era and icon. You finally get an opportunity in this elite select group of your peers to have some acknowledgement and praise on the national stage. You feel a sense of endearment to the brand, to Nike. And I was that kid at 18 who was deeply, deeply loyal to Nike. And when you lack, let's say, strong familial legacy and bonds, and I'm not saying that I did. I actually have a pretty rich familial legacy and rich family history, legacy and bonds, which is probably why in the end I was able to break that kind of what do I want to call it? That kind of you know warping, of the mind. I was able to break that because I have that. But there are a lot of people who don't. And so, when you have a society and a culture that is so deeply materialistic, brands and celebrities and entertainment, and thus even the narrative that's driven by those things, become religious. They become religious. They become people's identity. And I'm sitting here watching and I'm asking myself, and I'm asking you, Democrats, how many more lies do they have to tell you? Let's start with you Negroes first. How many more lies do they have to tell you Negroes? I mean, how many more bold-faced lies do these people have to tell you Negroes before you just throw your hands up and say, I'm not biting anymore. Can't do it. You can't fish with that same bait again. Not again. Not again. You can't fish with that same bait again. No. I saw that bait 5 times already. You know, I saw the rainbow worm. Let's call it the rainbow worm, for lack of not a comment about the LGBTQ. Although I will probably end up talking about the LGBTQ movement during this podcast, but that no pun intended. Okay, I'm not going for the rainbow worm. There actually are colorful worms that people use as bait. I hope people understand them. God knows a lot of people don't go fishing anymore, so it's you see what I mean? I mean, anyway, I mean, I'm not going for the rainbow worm again. I went for the rainbow worm 5 times, and all 5 times I came up, I ended up in a tackle box on some guy's, some fat, sleazy, sweaty, stank breath guy's boat. I'm not going for the rainbow worm again. I can't do it. Nah, nah. But time and time again, over and over, I find that people will take the rainbow worm. And then you got to start to ask yourself, and this is probably the darkest path in this whole thought process of asking the question, how do people actually believe this stuff? The darkest path is people crave tyranny. That freedom itself, the expression of God's love in the form of free will is so terrifying to people. We've actually built up a species-wide sort of a rejection and resent of free will itself. And in that, freedom, freedom has become seen as a burden versus a blessing. And people actually crave tyranny because tyranny is much easier. And tyranny is much easier, actually. In the final analysis, tyranny is easier than freedom. Freedom comes with responsibility. It comes with responsibility, and it comes with unknown danger. Tyranny, at least on the surface, appears to have less danger, more certainty, more measurable predictability. Although that is a scam. I mean that kind of is the whole scam, to be quite honest, especially when it comes to tyrannical, authoritarian, or totalitarian regimes. Is they give you the perception of safety and predictability right up until they kill you. And that is historical fact. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It is a historical fact. And we're going to walk through some of that. But I just asked myself again, when is enough enough? How much and you start to realize that it has nothing to do with the facts. It has nothing to do with the information. This is a psychological, a psychological and sort of deeply spiritual safeguard that people have built for themselves to keep from the scary unknown journey of figuring out the truth. It's almost like a defense mechanism. I mean, really, when you look at the liberal edifice, and I'm talking to all you liberals and Democrats out here, I can't play nice with you. I mean, I know this probably is triggering in many ways, but there's no other way to tell you. Just because I was there at one point. If you asked me at 16 or 17, we all thought Barack Obama was the greatest thing since sliced bread. Of course we did. I mean, we were told that, here is this smart, charismatic, articulate guy who's the first black president or going to be the first black president. And look at all these wonderful things that he says and that he wants to do. And it's just all hopeful. And, you get Shepard Fairey, who's a great street artist, but, he co-opted into the thing as well. And you get a great branding momentum going, and all of a sudden you get people following behind and following behind it. And it's just like the most gullible sheep-like phenomenon you can possibly create. You could even imagine, and then we're living in it right now. And all you liberals and Democrats, it's respectfully, it's 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 saddening. I'm actually more sad than I am upset, angry, or frustrated. It actually saddens me when I really start to think about how easily people have been brainwashed in our society. I actually more sad than I am upset. Um, because man, I mean, what a way to live. I mean that the truth is so frightening that the reality of society, the reality of human existence, even let's say, is so frightening that I would rather build these superficial or these artificial barriers in my own psyche, in my own conscience, in my own mind to protect myself from the unknown. Oof. I don't know. I don't know what to do about that. I mean, there's at a level that is such a existential and spiritual crisis of the human will and the human condition. Uh, who am I? mean, and you start to realize it. When you're out there on the campaign trail, you start to realize that people's rejection or even their unwillingness to come into contact with anything that challenges the mainstream narrative of the mainstream media. You start to realize it is that deep. You can tell how triggered people are by even asking certain questions. And Wuhan Waltz is a great example. Let's get into the meat and potatoes. As you look at the debate last night, and I mean, I thought it was a clear victory for JD Vance. I mean, it wasn't even close. It wasn't even it certainly wasn't close on the merit of the ideas or the policy, but it wasn't even close in the presentation. And that's where, I mean, at least the Democrats are trying to hang their hat on this sort of let's call it political speak. There's like this, and this is why I'm going back to reference William F. Buckley, and so people can go back and see um, how articulate, charismatic, and well presenting these individuals were, but how much substance there still was underneath it. I mean, intellectually, when you really started to think about what it was they were saying, it was profound, and it pulled on you, and it challenged you, and it forced you to question your own beliefs, because if you were being intellectually honest, you'd have to wrestle with the thing that was introduced. It was so novel, it was so genuine. It resonated so closely with what was really going on in society. You had to confront it, and then you had to adjust what you thought, or you had to come up with a retort or a response in real time, and that is how genuine discourse really goes. You want to see somebody who is presents an idea like a moderator, and you have one side explain their position, their baseline position, and the other side explain their baseline position, and then you'll add a nuance here and a nuance there, and both people, if they're being honest, kind of go, hey. Yeah, that nuance is, has some merit to it. That nuance, that nuance takes. I take to that. Okay, then let me modify and say, well, what about this? That's how the discourse is supposed to go. The Democrats have abandoned that completely. That's not a part of their intellectual process. Their process is we have a end in mind, and everything we say is to service that end. Everything we say is to circle back to reaffirm the end that we've already preset. And that's what you see these people doing with the political speaking. It's not just in politics, it's in pop culture. And that's why you can take any one of these celebrities, and it's funny because like identity politics, race politics. I was just listening to somebody talk about white privilege again. I'm so sick of hearing about white privilege. Regardless of if it's real or not. Okay, that's not even the point. The point is the way it's used and the way it's discussed is so corny. Every time I hear it, it triggers me. Because it's just corny. It's like the intellectual cheat sheet to try and sound like you know about politics, because anybody who really does know about politics can tell you haven't dived into any issues at all. Because if you did, you'd say something novel. 'Cause everybody has something novel to offer. And we have to get back to this understanding of the blessing of being human, and the power of our mind and consciousness, that we are all unique and we all do have something novel to offer. The big problem is most of us haven't even ventured into what we really think about a given thing to give anything novel. And so we just end up repeating what somebody else is saying. And it's not even the intellectual good stuff of what's, I mean, I could see if you go to, like Karl Marx, for example, okay? Obviously I detest everything about what he stood for and what he was trying to accomplish with his philosophy, but he was a philosopher. And if you go and read the stuff, again, there's some philosophical roots there, but people aren't even repeating that. It's like they've created this watered down cheat sheet version that even Karl Marx would roll in his grave. If he encountered it today, probably not, because it's getting to the desired goal. And no pun intended. We'll talk about Wuhan Waltz and, and what he said about China during the debate. But the point is, just go and listen to how people talk. It's so corny. It's so cheap. It's so milk toast surface kind of, and God, God, God forbid you find somebody who actually is semi-articulate, because then they do the thing where they actually make it seem like what they're saying is substantive because they can say it in an articulate way, but it doesn't mean anything. And that's what Tim Walz did all night last night. He just said the exact same platitudes and buzzwords, and he touched on the exact same party lines from the mainstream media. It's like they gave him a cheat sheet and said, "Here's what we've been pushing in the mainstream media. If you just stay here, if you just stay with this, if you just stay with these things, we'll be able to back you up." And that makes it intellectually cowardly. Right? That makes it intellectual cowardice when you watch somebody who is saying something that you already feel a sense of connection to. There's a level of intellectual cowardice there. Cowardice there. Really, I don't know how else to say it, because I know it's not convenient for you all, and it's definitely not convenient for me to say running for office. But I try and stay away from saying things that I kind of know will resonate with a given audience, because it's what Fox News is already saying, or it's what whoever and whatever outlet, or whatever that kind of cultural narrative that bubbles up to the surface. Real leaders don't talk like that. Your vice president shouldn't be talking like that. Go back and listen to the debate between Walter Mondale and Ronald Reagan. And I got disagreements with both of their policies and what happened. But the point is, go listen to how they talked. At least they were saying genuine and novel things. Tim Walz wasn't doing that. Kamala Harris isn't doing that. Come on, guys. Come on, guys. And the fact that you're so afraid of Donald Trump, or what you regard as nationalism or fascism or Nazism or white supremacy, the fact that you're so afraid of that, you would accept that type of intellectual dishonesty and fakeness from your leaders, is a huge condemnation of your own character. A huge condemnation. Win, lose, or draw, we must demand the highest level of intellectual leadership and integrity. Win, lose, or draw. Now, is Donald Trump some intellectual giant? No. But sometimes you do have to go back down to the basics. The way you can tell the difference between Donald Trump and all the rest of the people on the public stage in politics, or even in entertainment, is the things Donald Trump says don't have this vast agreement to him in that cohort of public figures, because everybody always criticize what they always criticize him for what he says. It's almost self-edifying to watch Donald Trump um, deal with this mainstream media environment and culture we have. It's self-edifying, because it proves that what he's saying is at least genuine. What he's saying is at least novel. It may be basic, and it's certainly basic to a lot of the people who follow and support him. And a lot of it is just common sense. And we've lost a lot of common sense with all the pseudo intellectual woke woo woo. So even just saying basic things like, hey, offshoring your manufacturing is killing the working class. That seems like, he's not trying to be smart. When I say it, I'm not trying to be smart or intellectual, if we want to get into some meaty intellectual shit, we can do that. But that's not what he's doing. But yet and still, it's at least more genuine than what these people are doing. It's obvious. You want to, and all you Democrats and liberals out there, if you sit at home in your pompous, pretentious sort of point of view and think to yourself, how does a black man come to follow Donald Trump? There's your answer. That's your answer, because some of us are tired of, some of us can aptly identify and are sick of being talked to like we're stupid with a bunch of superficial, pseudo-intellectual nonsense. And let's get into some of that right now. We're almost 45 minutes in. I'm sorry I had to set the stage that way, but let's get into the nonsense. Let's get into the let's go to the straight to two takeaways. I don't want to go down the whole list because I'm still a little sick, and I'm sorry I took that long to get to that, but this is the nuance. We got to set the stage. We got to understand what we're talking about, why we're even talking about in the first place. Then we can talk about the thing. And if you don't have that type of care and precision and dedication to the things that you're thinking about or talking about, then fine. Live in a sort of blissful peace. But don't pretend like you have any substance. Don't pretend like what you say online should be able to convince and sway me, because I can tell by what you say you really haven't thought it that far through. And how stupid would I be to listen to somebody who hasn't really thought it that far through? Just on principle, not unless it's just obvious, common sense. Like, hey, that door's closed. Don't walk into it. You're going to run right into the door. Oh, okay. Cool. Well, yeah. I mean, I may have had some huge intellectual investigation in my own head about the idea of doors. But if you say, hey, that door is closed, you're going to have to open that door. And I can see the door is closed. All right, you're right. Obviously, I got to open the door. But that's not what we're talking about here. This is all politics. It's all ideas. The whole thing is about the ideas. The entire realm and arena of politics are about the ideas that we as a human society are trying to place a priority on. What are those ideas? You saw clearly yesterday the difference in the ideas. And the two takeaways, two very, very dark tales from Tim Walz. One was about China. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, everybody saw it. The whole world saw it. The whole world saw the NBC. I was watching on NBC. I don't even know who did the debate, who was actually the host of the debate. But everybody saw the moderators try to cover for Tim Walz during the China question. Why? The quiet part out loud is that everybody sort of understands that there's something going on with China with relation to America, with relation to foreign policy, trade, potential military conflict, so on and so forth. Everybody kind of now has the sense, at least if you're watching a vice presidential debate or if you pay any attention to politics whatsoever, China is in the atmosphere. Everybody understands something's going on with China. That China answer was ridiculous. It was just outright dishonest. It was almost unbelievable. I mean, if you're going to lie, double and triple down on the lie. I wouldn't suggest it. I'd say just be honest, but you already lied once, and now you're going to double and triple down on what? Kind of this nothing answer? That's what it was. And it actually revealed a lot. And this is what happens when people start lying. When people start lying, they start getting that goofy, manic energy where they don't really know where to go next because they can't keep up with the lie. They are losing track of the lie. The lie was so clear. Governor Tim Walz was not there during the Tiananmen Square massacre. Now, the reason you could even say that as a governor is as a governor candidate, as somebody who ran in public office before in the House, the reason you could even say that or claim that is because you believe most common people who are going to vote for you or have an opinion about you don't know what happened in Tiananmen Square to begin with. And that happens to be true. A lot of American citizens don't know what happened at Tiananmen Square. They don't know about the Tiananmen Square massacre, something that you should go become familiar with, obviously, because it's coming up in your presidential debates for a reason. He wasn't there the day of the massacre, okay? That was a lie. But he did say that he had been to China a number of times, whether it was over-exaggerated, under-exaggerated, neither here nor there. He has been to China. The greatest tale, the granddaddy of all tales during this entire presidential campaign came from Minnesota's Governor Tim Walz last night. The granddaddy of tales was Governor Tim Walz being asked about China last night. And he actually had the audacity to say, I learned a lot about how to govern when I was in China. It's almost unbelievable. It's almost, it was shocking. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I turned and the people I was watching the debate with, and did he just say what I think he said? And he said, yeah. I went there and I learned a lot about, and then they asked him, they stopped him, and they were, are you, and he said, and he paused for a second. Yeah, no, I was in China and I learned a lot about governing during my time there. You do realize that the Tiananmen Square massacre was a rising communist, authoritarian, and now totalitarian Chinese regime brutalizing and killing protesters who were fighting for the same freedoms and rights that we have constitutionally here today. And you say you learned a lot from governing there in China, and you come home with socialism? And the thing I couldn't figure out was, did he say it on accident, or did he mean to say it? I mean, and that's how deep off into this this end of the pool that we've gotten now, is that I don't know if he actually made a mistake or if he meant it. I don't even know which one would be worse. I guess him meaning it would obviously be worse, because it would mean that he was basically affirming totalitarianism and authoritarianism, which they are. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But, I still, even still, as vile and as angry and as mean as they say all of us MAGA Republicans are, I still hold the slightest hope that these people aren't as evil and deranged as they've proven they are. Even still. And I don't do it out of weakness. And I really only do it when the setting or environment is one with certain intellectual constraints, right? You're talking about a presidential debate, or you're talking about a discourse. There's a certain level of good faith you have to grant upon entry, or else the arena itself is undermined. You can't actually have a conversation. And I'm sure that's what you saw J.D. Vance doing. And I'm sure that's what a lot of people mean when they say they want to see a debate where it doesn't devolve into this kind of, angry, nasty back and forth. Because, in order to have a truly intellectual debate or discussion about any topic, despite what anybody feels, despite what either side believes, you have to grant that good faith and respect upon entry. So because I'm watching a debate, I grant that respect. I grant that grace. In the real world, I wouldn't. And if we in the physical real world and application and strategy, I'm not granting that, because the consequences are too dire. And just so happens we're talking about communism, and while I may be able to have some good faith hope about what Governor Walz was saying in a debate format, as soon as the debate is over, I go to the realization that communism is on our doorstep. In fact, it's in the fence already. It's in the wire. Well within the wire. And he proved it. And the first thing I thought was, man, everybody's getting to see what's wrong with Minnesota. When they say Minnesota is communist, you just heard our governor all but affirm that the style of governing in China, aided him in how he governs. He didn't say, I learned how not to govern when I was in China. He didn't say, I learned everything. I learned everything I needed to know about the pitfalls of government, a corrupt government, when I was in China, during my trips to China. Because if he thought that, he probably wouldn't have kept going back to China in the first place. I refuse to play in China. I have refused to play in China professionally a number of times on principle, because I couldn't imagine playing a basketball game there in Shanghai knowing that the Uyghurs are being held in concentration camps on the other side of the country there in East Turkestan and Xinjiang. I couldn't imagine that. It would corrupt my spirit and my desire to play the game. And that's not a virtue signal. I mean, at least I don't think it is. I'm just saying, honestly, when I was asked to play in China, my first response was, I don't trust the Chinese government because I know the history. I, I don't know what else to, I don't even, full stop. No, I don't want to go to China. And as a matter of fact, I don't want to go to Taiwan, Japan, or South Korea either, which are very good places to play professional basketball, they say, and pay really well and are very Americanized for their professional basketball players. I mean, everything is paid for. Like in South Korea, they give you an apartment, they give you a driver with a car, they pay for all your meals. A lot of times you live in a hotel and you eat room service every, 3 times a day. You got unlimited room service. I mean, it's like you live like a king in South Korea. And if anybody who's been to Seoul or South Korea in general, it's a very Americanized country. Very good place to go and live and play if you're a 23, 24-year-old, 25-year-old young man and you're trying to rack up some cash and play the game you love. I wouldn't go. I wouldn't go. Why? Because I know how heavy China's influence is on all the surrounding countries, and it is. And that's a fact. It's not a conspiracy. It's a matter of fact. But I certainly wasn't going to play in China, and they probably pay the most. And my boy, Mike Beasley, that's my boy. That's my boy. I love Mike Beasley, another guy who's genuine and authentic. Probably doesn't even realize what the real implications of playing in China or what China represents. A lot of these basketball players don't. I saw the same thing with Kyrie Irving. When Kyrie Irving went through his controversy with the NBA and Nike, and then he ended up partnering with the Chinese shoe manufacturer, I thought to myself, damn, he doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't get it. He doesn't get it. He understands some things, but some things he's still in the dark about, and that's okay. We all come around at our own time. I'm not getting on Kyrie Irving. I wish him the best in his venture, and I'm happy that he has his own business now and he's running it the way he wants to. I'm very skeptical of his Chinese partners, and for good reason, because Tiananmen Square is a modern example of how people who should have had the freedom to assemble and speak their mind were massacred for it. And the difference between that and some of the other places in the world where similar things have happened is that regime is still in power today. That regime didn't do that, and then they faced a cultural revolution, and all of a sudden, the way China is governed has changed. No, the way that China governed that caused Tiananmen Square is the exact same way that China governs today, only more entrenched. So entrenched culturally, everybody now knows you better not speak out or get too loud because the same thing will happen to you. In fact, the latest round of protests there in Hong Kong are another good example of that. And even furthermore, what they did to the Shanghainese during COVID-19 was a cultural retaliation. And you can only know that if you study enough to know the history. These aren't things that you casually come across. You have to investigate and be interested, genuinely interested enough to go and read the factual history. It's not conspiracy. If you go read the factual history about the CCP and the trajectory of the China as a country and the Chinese government and the faction situation, the provincial faction situation there in China, then when during COVID, everybody knew it. Everybody who knows something about China understood what happened when the Shanghainese were locked down. That was a retaliation. That was a cultural retaliation. Very interesting one too. I want to point this out as a little nuance for you to go and dive into on your spare time. Remember, we were all, a lot of us, let's say us in the MAGA movement, or any of us who rejected the COVID lockdowns and mandates and all of that kind of tyrannical business that went down, we were under the assumption that China had contributed to and is, if not the head of, a major player at the head table of a globalist agenda. True, but understand, uh, some doors are revolving doors. And China's position in the world right now is a revolving door because they are geographically, in terms of population and as such manufacturing power, they can play many sides against the middle. And that's exactly what they did then and exactly what they will continue to do. And they're not being shy about that. If you look at what the rhetoric, the public rhetoric coming from China is, they admit it. They say, we are the manufacturing power and source of the entire world, and we will wield it and use it as we see fit to make China the center of the future. One belt, one road. All you got to do is go read it. And so when I say that, yes, the globalists, they love China. They love China because China is an example of the authoritarianism and totalitarianism they wish they could have in the West. And when we say globalists, we are mostly talking about a Eurocentric, a European-driven, scientific, engineering, managerial elite class. We're talking about Davos, Switzerland, and Brussels, and the United Nations. And so when we're talking about in many countries around the world that have bent the knee to their intellectual edifices and agendas, but that is who we're talking about. The Chinese are very different. The Chinese have their own culture. They view themselves as their own race of people. And as such, the Chinese have their own history that they're still dealing with outside of what's going on in the rest of the world. They still have, just like here in America, we have our own history that we're dealing with here in America before we get to the international and world stage. Same thing there in China. And if you go back far enough, you realize that Shanghai and Hong Kong had both been places that were seen as the international tide to the West and Western influence. And although we see Xi Jinping as the headmaster or one of the headmasters of this globalist agenda, Xi Jinping is still fighting for power at that table. And to have power and solidify power at that table, he has to solidify power in China. And if he's going to solidify power in China, he has to make sure there's as little Western influence in China as possible. And so when COVID hit, and right before they had those Hong Kong protests, and as soon as COVID hit, they locked down Shanghai. And if you remember, they locked down Shanghai so bad that in Shanghai there were people on their balconies screaming at the top of their lungs. The footage was bone chilling of the type of tyrannical lockdowns they enforced there in Shanghai. And nobody knows how many of those people survived. Nobody even knows what happened to those people. We have to trust the Chinese government and the testimony from people on the ground who may have been intimidated or influenced by other means to tell us what happened there. We don't know. We do know that in a crisis perceived or real, in a crisis, the Chinese government will throw people in concentration camps and even they will disappear. Just like the first doctor on the record who tipped the whole world off about COVID in the first place. He said, Dr. Lee. Dr. Lee we are witnessing a respiratory infection or a type of pneumonia or something that is so aggressive and dangerous. We need to warn every single person in hospital that this thing is a problem. You know, we are looking at and they threatened him. They threatened him. The first doctor in China that was on record sending out emails about this new pneumonia, or respiratory infection that was killing patients quicker than he had ever seen. The Ministry of Public Safety there in China threatened him. They told him he had to recant the statement or he would sit in a jail cell. It just so happened that the virus progressed so quickly and moved across the world so quickly, they had to go back and basically apologize and walk back how they treated him, and then he ended up dying from the virus. But that's not the point. The point is their impulse in China is to censor free speech. That's their go-to impulse. That's what they did in Tiananmen Square. That's what they did during the Hong Kong protest. That's what they did there in Wuhan during the pandemic. And the reason why, because President Xi will work with the globalists, but he's a nationalist and he has no choice but to be a nationalist because the Chinese culture is very different than the American culture. The American culture, in America, we have a cultural view of our existence as a melting pot. In China, they have the mandate of heaven. They view themselves as the superior race. So they have no choice but to be ethno-national. President Xi can't be any other way. He'll do business with everybody. But the goal is always to lift up China. And there's nothing really wrong with that. How you go about it is certainly to be questioned, but there's nothing wrong with having your people first. I guarantee you in China, they have a China first policy. President Xi's worldview is a China first worldview. Russians are very similar. Deep, deep cultural history, profound sense of Russian ethnic and geographical heritage. They have a Russia first policy. They're in India. They have an India first policy. They're in Pakistan. They have a Pakistan first policy. We here in the West are the only ones struggling with this kind of self-hatred and self-doubt about our national identity. My point is this. China's a totalitarian regime. The CCP is a totalitarian regime, and Governor Walz, vice presidential candidate Governor Walz, literally said, I learned a lot about governing when I was in China. What? What did you learn about governing? You learned how to set up the snitch line you set up here in Minnesota during COVID, during the lockdowns? You learned how to bend the interpretation of constitutional law when it comes to free speech. You learn that socialism is one man's socialism is another man's neighborliness. So he didn't say it last night, but everything Governor Walz has represented up until this point lends great insight into what he meant when he said he learned a lot about governing when he was in China. And it was a dog whistle. If you ask me, they're just dog whistling the quiet part out loud. It wasn't a dog whistle, it was a bullhorn. But it was strange because it was a bullhorn and where he covered it with these mannerisms like he didn't really know what he was saying or he didn't really know what he was talking about. And that's where you can't really tell if these people are deadly and maniacally smart or if they're incredibly stupid. I don't know, but I don't trust them. And that's the question I'm asking you all out there tonight. Why do you still trust these people? The next thing, that's the second biggest takeaway from the whole thing, China's first. And the China and the rise of communism, people say, oh, well, you say communism. That's just like a right-wing talking point. Excuse me? Excuse me? We traded away the only reason. Let me save that. It's not a talking point. It is a reality. But the second biggest takeaway of the night was when they talked about gun rights. Yeah, they talked about gun rights, and Governor Walz had the audacity to reference Finland. And they always go to the same trope. They always reference these European countries. They always reference these European countries that don't have the same type of gun violence we have. And it should be an insult. If you're a working class man, woman, if you're a working class man or woman in this country, it should be an insult every time they reference another country's rates of gun violence, when talking about America. Why should that be an insult? Because you subsidize all those countries. Yeah, us Americans, the American working class, subsidizes, guarantees the protection of all the countries they reference. And they may not need a gun law as a fundamental constitutional right in their country, but it's only because they are subsidized and their protection is guaranteed by a country that does have that fundamental right. You understand what I'm saying? I hope that the only reason Finland doesn't need a constitutional, a Second Amendment, guaranteed, basic, fundamental, constitutional guarantee for Second Amendment right. The only reason that Finland doesn't need a fundamental gun rights law is because their security is guaranteed and subsidized by a country that does have that fundamental law. Yeah, you got to understand. The greatest home court advantage that America has are the two oceans and the fact that if you make landfall here in America, you're going to face random gunfire every couple of blocks. We got triple, quadruple the guns of any other nation combined. All the other nations combined, we got quadruple the guns of every other nation combined. You think it's tough to occupy Iran? And we might talk about that by the end here. I'm probably going to go to full 2 hours. I was sick today, so I wasn't expecting to even, I was going to do a quick out, but there's so much here. You think it's tough to occupy Iran or Afghanistan? They don't got nearly the amount of guns that we have in this country. Let a foreign nation make landfall here, and for whatever reason they overcome the American military, which isn't going to happen because our military and our National Guard and our police have an enormous amount of firepower and guns themselves. But let's just say that the American government failed the same way that the Iraqi government failed, and the American people went into a full sort of insurgent mode. You think that they're going to be able to occupy America? They'd be in the same forever war here. We're fucking around trying to get ourselves in there. And it's the destiny of us if we ever capture Moscow or if we ever, make the Russian government topple. We can't occupy Russia. That's why when I say we have to end that forever war, it's not that we may not be able to defeat the Russians in kinetic combat, which I don't necessarily know if we can do that either, but that's not really the point. The point is, let's say we do defeat the Russians. Let's say Moscow falls. We will face an insurgency in Russia for 30 years until one day we'll say, you know what? It's not worth it. We're pulling out of here the same way we pulled out of Afghanistan. But my point is, don't reference Finland. No, Finland and all these other European countries, their security is guaranteed by you, the American working class. The American working and middle class financially guarantees the security of the European Union. You're not European. Tim, we're not European. Don't reference the European countries. We're not European. We're American. And we actually uphold the security of those countries. And one of the home field advantages, one of the negotiation tactics that we have as Americans is that those countries don't really want to get into a conflict with us because they know, just as happened in World War I and World War II, at some point, if you can't reach the enemy at home where they manufacture their weapons, you can't really win a war against them. This is that tried and tested, just kind of, logical, coherent history that the American public must be missing. Because if you weren't, there's no way you'd accept the shit these people are telling you. Everybody knows if you get into a full-blown kinetic war with a nation and you can't reach that nation at home where they manufacture their weapons and their supplies, you can never really beat them. And all of these other nations know right now, for right now, that they have no real chance to invade or occupy the United States of America. They all know it. And part of the reason they know it is because the Second Amendment is a fundamental law, and there's over 450 million guns in this country on the streets. And that is a great home field advantage. So don't be telling us that we should look at the Finnish gun laws. No, we don't want to look at Finland's gun laws. No, because we don't want to become a victim to tyranny the same way Finland claims they may become a victim of an aggressive Russia. We don't have to worry about an aggressive Russia here in the United States. And anybody who tells you we do is lying to you. Finland has to worry about an aggressive Russia. And hey, my heart goes out to you and everybody else there in the European Union or everybody else anywhere where there's some tyrannical, aggressive regime that you have to worry about. Maybe you should do better with your Second Amendment rights. Maybe your citizens should have a more profound sense of freedom, but they don't. See, there in the European Union, they have this egalitarian sort of worldview. But when you have that egalitarian worldview, you have to depend on somebody else to provide your security. Until there are no more bastions of freedom left, there are no more gun-toting cowboys left like the Americans to call. And that's what they really want. And they're not going to say that. But we know. The MAGA movement, we fucking know. We see that we see over that horizon. We see that for those Scandinavian countries, that sort of egalitarianism where you got to call on the big brother America to provide your security while you do, your sabbatical, spiritual enlightenment or whatever the fuck you call it, all this egalitarian bullshit. While you do your egalitarian yoga, you got to rely on some heavy gun-toting cowboys to ensure your freedom. But what about when those gun-toting cowboys get turned into egalitarian Finocchios too? Who are we going to call? Who's America going to call if we give up our basic fundamental rights that make us that bastion of freedom? Who are we going to call? They're going to want you to call the United Nations. They're going to want you to call China. When China's the new beacon on the hill of the future society, the global future, when China's the beacon on the hill, we're going to call Beijing? No, because that's where the tyranny is going to be coming from. There's going to be nobody to call. And that's the point. There are limits. There are limits, measurable limits on protections and security. And one of those protections is our Second Amendment rights here in this country are a bastion of freedom for the entire world. And if we really, and this is the key, you got to understand how this links up. If we were really interested after World War II in making all these nations self-determining, the first thing we would have gave them was the Second Amendment. The second thing we would have given them is the plans and the infrastructure to make sure that they can produce enough of their own weapons in their own countries to fight, to at least mount a reasonable resistance for any nation that tried to strong arm them, including us. But we didn't do that because we liked the position of being big brother that'll come help you if anybody messes with you. We liked that sort of mafia-esque protection racket, and that's what we're running. And that's why I tell people, don't talk to me about crime. Yeah, crime's out of control, but when your government steals, everybody steals. When your government's a mafia racket, of course your young people on the streets have no regard for life or the law. This entire country's business model after World War II is one big mafia-style protection racket, an international protection racket. That's what we're doing. So no, we won't be taking Finland's gun laws, Wuhan, Walz. No, we like American gun laws. And in fact, our understanding of the American gun laws and our position in the world as the bastion of freedom is now, it has now become the calling card. It has now become the driving force to reorient the way that America is used on the world stage. It's actually the edifice of the America First idea. We're not going to be big brother and play this protectionary racket for all these other countries while our middle class and working class starves. And we get told about climate change. And that was the last and final takeaway. I know I said there were two, but it made me think in real time about the climate conversation as well. And it's another great example. Ties back to China, just, first order ties back to China. And how do you Democrats believe? I mean, do you think you're fooling us? See, this is what makes me really, confrontational. And people say, well, why do you talk to people like that? Why do you talk to the voters like that, people who vote for you? Because when you're just trying to lie to me, how am I supposed to know that you're not just mocking me? When it's so obvious, it's common sense. So if you're not willing to acknowledge common sense in a conversation, whether it be online or in person, you must just be fucking with me. And if you're just fucking with me, then fuck you. That's it. We're not really talking about the ideas anymore. So we've lost that thin veil of civility that we grant each other in the arena of politics or intellectual discourse. Fuck you. You mean to tell me that you liberals and Democrats and progressives and we are the world egalitarian omnisexuals, you mean to tell me that you actually think we're stupid enough to believe you're pushing a one planet climate change narrative where we, the Americans, should reduce our carbon emissions while China's allowed to do whatever they want to in terms of carbon emissions? And don't tell me there's going to be any regulation or any oversight, because you can't regulate or oversee the Chinese Communist Party. We learned that during COVID. Isn't that what Kamala Harris was saying about President Xi? Ain't that the criticism of Trump? Is that President Trump in one tweet or something, back during that time said, I applaud President Xi. It's probably just being, cordial and polite, trying to, reach the hand out to our national mortal enemy, which I wouldn't have done. But maybe that means I'm not fit to lead. I would have told President Xi, fuck you. Fuck you, motherfucker. Tariffs are going to 150%. And if we got to go to war, then we're going to war. But one thing we will not do is sit by and watch the decline of this country while you sit on a fucking iron throne there in Beijing. Not going to happen. That's what I would have said. And we would have geared up to go to war if need be. But see, you can't really talk like that unless you manufacture your own goods. And I would assume that's why Donald Trump didn't talk like that. Because it just so happens that where our political and economic elites have led us, we are fully dependent on a nation that is completely totalitarian and racist and eugenicist and every other pejorative, nasty, demeaning name that they call the MAGA movement. Yeah, that's who you've given our fucking countries. Our country's essential supply chain has been given over to a totalitarian regime that is guilty of all the things that you insult us with. So when that's the case, you actually can't talk like that. At least not without great hardship come down on the American people. Now, my answer would actually be, let the hardship start now. And that's the prudent thing, is let the hardship begin. Yeah, nope. I know it's gonna be a hard 7 months in this country, but we have all the natural resources and we have all the ingenuity that we need to be able to be a country that is independent from any sort of essential supply chains that rest there in a totalitarian country. We actually don't need them. We've allowed our elites and our leaders and our corporations and our politicians to create a circumstance where we believe we need them, where we may need them currently or we may need them in the immediate, but we don't need them in the final analysis. We definitely don't need them. In fact, we taught them how to be what they are today. We taught the Chinese how to be the manufacturing superpower of the world. When we went to China, they didn't even have roads. They didn't have paved roads when we went to China. They didn't have fucking airports. They didn't have factories when we went to China. When Nixon and Kissinger went into China, when we were the industrial power, when we were the biggest industrial power in the world, when we were that industrial power after World War II that Adolf Hitler knew would be the downfall of the German war machine, because no matter how hard he tried, they just could not get bombs to reach Detroit, Michigan, where we made our tanks and our tires and our Humvees. When we were that industrial power, China didn't even have paved roads. So when they say that the West is declining, it is manufactured decline. When they say the West is declining, it has been done intentionally. And that's not a conspiracy theory. The proof is in the pudding. The results are right there. We were the industrial power, and we made a conscious decision to give that manufacturing power and home field advantage over to another country that was already leaning communist, by the way. Remember, we put Mao in charge over there. Never forget. Never forget, we helped the Mao Cultural Revolution there in China. We weren't we weren't a spectator to it. We were a participant. Oh yeah, oh yeah. That whole no, we were right there. Again, my point is this. But isn't the criticism of Donald Trump was that he was too friendly with Xi? Kamala Harris said it. She said you actually applauded Xi for how he handled the COVID response and him sharing information with us. Well, if he can't, if we can't trust him to share information about COVID, why would we trust him to share information about pollution or carbon emissions? If the man doesn't feel obligated to share information with America about viruses, then he doesn't feel obligated to share information about anything. And that you're admitting that you can't trust anything he says. But when it comes to pollution and carbon emissions, we should trust him. When it comes to COVID, we shouldn't. When it comes to what Donald Trump was involved in, you can't trust President Xi. When it comes to the future of global climate change and the climate initiative and the carbon reduction, then all of a sudden we can trust China. Or what you're actually saying is, you know what? America's more guilty than China. You Americans, America, we're more guilty than China is. So you know what? If China's going to emit more carbons than us, so be it. If our country crashes and fucking burns because we're busy trying to fart around with solar power that, by the way, has components made in China, while our country crashes and burns, so be it. Because the West is guilty of racism. Are you fucking kidding? Fuck you. Fuck you. And that's what you have to, and eventually you get there. You know, eventually when you actually work through the intellectual piece of what's being suggested and what's being pushed, this propaganda, you have no choice but to arrive at fuck you. And arriving at fuck you may actually be the death knell of why, hey, Royce White's not electable. But I guarantee you this, as people start to figure out what's going on, if it's not too late, there's nothing to happen in the future but for a politician like me to win. Yeah, time is actually on our side. And that's the thing that people are getting twisted. Maybe it's not on your side out there if you're a 75-year-old boomer, you know, unfortunately, you know, there was a time when the leaders of your generation probably made a similar sort of plea to you about these matters of politics and culture and geopolitics and so on and so forth. There was a time when your thought leaders, I know it to be true because I remember I'm going to watch William Buckley. I'm watching those intellectual thought leaders at that time say the same shit that I'm saying now. Difference is a lot of them were a lot older when they first started saying it than I am now. So I think time is even more on my side than some of them. But the more and more people get fed up with the obvious lies, there's nowhere for me to go but up. I'm not really in a rush. No, yeah, if you guys think that Amy Klobuchar is great because she smiles and waves and she goes to the local cookie bake and everybody loves, loves her kind of Minnesota nice demeanor, fine. I mean, let's see how many cookies they bake you when you're living in a fucking gulag. And it's not going to be like a gulag like in communist Russia or Mao China. It'll probably be a very, plush sort of, it'll be more like the Truman Show. You'll be in this sort of dystopian, grid city, smart city where you're being watched and strange things happen, like people say the wrong shit and then they disappear. But the convenience of how everything works is so good. Nobody really has the courage to say anything about it. That's probably what the new gulag is going to look like. Just so you know. And just so you know, you're already kind of living in it now. And that's not a conspiracy theory. When people talk too loud about certain things, you never hear from them again. Or they're discredited, or their lives are destroyed, or there's some trumped up charge against them, like Donald Trump. And you're kind of living in it already. But it's going to get worse. I guarantee you that. Especially when you give up your Second Amendment rights and there's no more bashing of freedom. Then it's going to get real tyrannical. And Kamala Harris and Tim Walz and the rest of these Western elites down there in Mexico, been taken over by communists, all three branches of government, communists. And they plan to do the same thing here. And finally, this was funny. What's her name? Wilkerson, whatever her name, Wilkers, or, I don't know if the lady's black or not. She's, got some melanin to her skin. You know what I'm talking about. She always is, you know, moderating the debates, and people try and play nice with her. Trump even tried to play nice with her, because if he doesn't, then he's like a misogynist. Fuck you. Fuck her. She's a liar. She's a liar. She's like, the biggest takeaway, she gets those manic eyes going. That's the sign of that liberal mania. And if that's you out there, you got to put that on trial. That sort of manic energy that they get, that Governor Walz manic energy, you got to put that shit on trial. That's a deeply unsettled spirit. I'm telling you, and you can tell by the things that they propose, but you can just see it in their body language, that manic energy. And she had it right after the debate, and she had to try and cover up for the Wuhan Waltz, gaffe, because it was a gaffe of epic proportions. I mean, there are some people even in the America First and Republican Party, especially from the mainstream apparatus, that are shilling for China as well, and they're part of that same sort of globalist mentality. So they won't really try and pin down on what Governor Walz said about China. Maybe they will. A lot of people will try and find something else, because they don't really want to touch on China like that either. But if there was any consistent intellectual integrity in this movement, the only conversation would be about what he said about China. That's it. Because it's the granddaddy of all tales. It really is the hail communism of this entire election. And so she was trying to cover for him. And what does she say right away? She comes on and she says, well, I think the biggest moment of the night was when Governor Walz asked J.D. Vance, did Joe Biden win the 2020 election or not? No. Now what? And I didn't like how J.D. Vance, to be honest, I didn't like how J.D. Vance kind of, I thought it was tactful. I thought what he said is actually acceptable. Because, like, if you're a sportsman, right, if you're an athlete, we're only going to talk about yesterday's game so much. We're only going to keep talking about the game that we played before so much, unless there's something that we're trying to learn or take from the game. Like, let's say we play a team this year that we played last year, and they got a lot of the same players, or they run a lot of the same stuff. We can go back and watch the film, and we can see tendencies that are going to help us prepare for this game. So there is some of talking about the past to prepare for the future. But it's perfectly acceptable to say, you know what, that game's behind us. Tonight or that game in the future is about how we play. And we're focused on that, and we're focused on beyond. So it was an acceptable answer. But I also realized that part of the reason J.D. Vance didn't really want to get down is because he and probably whoever else is around him in the campaign, still feels some sense of awkwardness in saying that the 2020 election was stolen. And I mean, I just haven't shied around that in my campaign. You can go right to my Wikipedia and they'll say, hey, he's an election denier. I'm an election skeptic. I'm very skeptical of elections. And I think J.D. Vance did mention that people have been questioning the outcome of elections for a long time, Democrats included. So I think it was acceptable that he said we're looking to the future. I'm not really getting down on JD about saying that. It's a perfectly acceptable answer. We're looking to the future. And amen, we are. Because the future is what's most important. We can learn from the past. And if there's one huge gaping hole in this entire election season, it's that we haven't really even discussed how we plan to secure the elections, right? And that's kind of the elephant in the room. I'm just going to say. And let me say that here now, 33 days out from the election. 33 days out from the election, and nobody has really told us, and I'm talking about from our movement, nobody has really made it concrete how we plan to combat the election integrity, how we plan to ensure the election integrity or fight for the election security. Nobody's really made that a sticking point. And I'm talking about I'm on the inside. If it's there, nobody's told me. As United States Senate candidate, I didn't get a memo. I didn't get an email. We did a guard the ballots here, which is a specific Minnesota statutory law that we can invoke. And the Secretary of State said, well, fuck you. Basically is what they said. Fuck you. That's not the interpretation of the language. Of course they can say that. They got the Attorney General, the governor, 2 senators, 4 Congress people, the Secretary of State, the state auditor. They got the whole kit and caboodle. They got the House and the Senate here in the state. They feel like they can interpret the law however they want. And that's exactly how communism fucking starts. So we enacted an election integrity and security initiative, but I haven't heard anything, on what we're doing around the country. And you know why they can't say what we're doing? Because everybody knows the elephant in the fucking room is that the Republican Party has hung its fucking hat on the rule of law. We're the party of law and order until the law has been captured by communists and they're going to interpret the law and use the law any way they want. And then everybody sits in their fucking homes scared because, what do you do? Right? No, that's it. No, it's not a question. And drop in the comments if you got something else to say, if you think it's something else. Go ahead and drop it in the fucking comments. I know I'm not statesmanlike or senatorial today. It might be the fucking NyQuil. Okay, I'm not supposed to use the F word for all you 501c3 milk toast Christians out there who let the communists and Satanists take the country in the first place. And you did. Okay. I know you don't like the F word. I know it makes you uncomfortable to hear the F word. But drop in the fucking comments if you think it's something different, because I'm running the race here. I see what it is. What it is everybody knows that the entire industry of law, the entire legal industry, from the attorneys to the prosecutors to the district judges, the judges, the district judges, even the Supreme fucking Court, all of the legal industry tilts liberal. All of them. The vast majority of them. And the ones that don't, they're fucking parasites. They're fucking blood-sucking leeches. Every conservative attorney in this fucking country should be marshaling up to the front fucking line to offer their fucking services pro bono to combat and fight these legal battles all across the country for every single ballot. But they're not. They're not, because they got their football and they got their, their pensions, their 401ks, and, they got their golden parachutes, or they got their, what is it? Their equity, their partner equity in the firm or whatever the fuck else, talk a big game. They say they're conservative, but the push comes to shove. You got to protect that dog bowl. And that dog bowl is the same dog bowl you're going to get your fucking face pushed in with a bowl full of shit when the communists really get up and when they really get going. Oh, they haven't got going yet. They're just getting started. When they really get going, you'll have wished that you had kicked that dog bowl out and demanded something better before they fill that dog bowl with shit and smash your face down in it. That's what's really going on here. That's why you haven't heard a concise answer on how we're going to secure these elections, because everybody knows it's going to be a legal battle, and everybody who knows everybody with half a brain has to deal with the dark and daunting reality that the legal field in this country overwhelmingly tilts liberal because we let the fucking communists take all of the law schools. So, I'm skeptical of the elections because Amy Klobuchar told me to be. In 2018, Amy Klobuchar said there's a problem with the machines. We need to have backup paper ballots in every state. That was Amy Klobuchar, MSNBC, 2018. They think you're so stupid they can come back to you in 2024 and tell you it's a dangerous conspiracy theory to even question the elections at all. This is what I'm talking about, you Democrats and liberals. How do you come to... Did you not see it? Did you not see when Amy Klobuchar said on MSNBC that the machines can be hacked? Did you not see? Or are you just playing a partisan fucking bullshit game? And if you're playing a partisan bullshit game, that's fine. I get it. But don't expect me to take you serious, and don't expect me to do some huge song and dance to vie for your vote. I'm not doing it. This country is going to stand up. This country's going to stand up, have some integrity and sacred honor, or it's going to crash and burn. And that's just it. Either the country's going to stand up and have some integrity and sacred honor, or it's going to crash and burn. And the sad part about it is some of the people, and this is the danger with majorities, this is the dangers that talk about the threat to democracy. Let's talk about the threat of democracy. Everybody wants to talk about the threat to democracy. Nobody wants to talk about the threats of democracy. The great threat of democracy is if an overwhelming majority decides that the fate, that the path of a country or a given set of people that are decided by a democratic majority, if a democratic majority decides that the nation will crash and burn, then by democratic principles, the rest of us have no choice but to go down with the ship. I know you don't like that Joy and Reed. I know the Joy and Reeds and the Rachel Maddows and the Penskes and the Kamala Harrises and Tim Waltzes and all these other Finocchio, omnisexual, egalitarian shills and puppets in the political world or in the media world. I know they don't like when you go down and talk about philosophy at that first principle level and they call you crazy for doing so. I know. But I dare any one of you to challenge that. If an overwhelming majority in a democratically run country decides that the fate of their country is to crash and burn, is it not true that the rest of the country has to go down with the ship or they have to revolt? And that's what our founding fathers said multiple fucking times. Now, I hope it doesn't come to that, obviously. It would be better for everybody if it didn't come to that. But that is what the founding fathers prescribed. And that is part of why these same people have tried to write those founding fathers out of history or delegitimize or discredit them. It's not because they were racist and owned slaves. It's because they had a profound sense of American citizenship and they understood and articulated that sometimes revolution is necessary, especially when your government becomes tyrannical, especially when the people no longer have the intellectual substance to understand when their rights are actually being infringed upon, because then the entire populace is doomed to the fate of a small and sometimes very small majority. Daunting. Dangerous to even talk that way in these times. I don't know. I'm the crazy one. I don't know. I thought what I said there right just now was just basic first principles. If you live in a democratically run institution or country or anywhere where there's a majority rule, the majority can decide to take down the whole and the rest have to go down with the ship. That's just one of the fundamental sort of axiomatic truths of democracy, democratic process. And it's one of the heresies of democracy. Again, I've said for a long time, everybody said, oh, well, the threat to democracy. There are also threats of democracy. And to them, when they talk about democracy like some sacred cow, that's also a granddaddy of all tales. They're also saying that democracy itself can't be corrupt, as though if you have a democracy, there's no real, threat of corruption. What kind of fucking twisted racket, what kind of twisted historical, psychological racket is that? Of course democracies can be corrupt. The modern way democracy is used is so different than the way it was used in its inception in the early Greek city and Westphalian nation states, and way different than it was used by our founding fathers. It is now used as a coverall or catch-all statement to discredit anybody who has criticisms for the institutions that uphold the democratic process. This is what Eric Weinstein was saying in the clip I posted on X. There's two forms of democracy. There's a democracy for, by, of, for, and by the people. And then there's this type B democracy, the democracy that they're describing, the institutions that must be upheld that sprang from democracy some time ago, after the World War, after World War II, the post-World War II democratic liberal order. When they say democracy, what they're saying is These institutions are too important to fail. These institutions cannot be threatened. These institutions are the load-bearing walls for our entire society. So when they say democracy, they're not talking about the constitutional democracy. They can't be, because they're simultaneously trying to discredit and sort of disappear, wash all of our founding fathers out of our history. So we know they're not. We know that they don't view the founding fathers as having any real credibility. Look at how they talk about them. Look at how they act about the Constitution, about fundamental rights, like the Second Amendment. They're piecemealing it. It's a la carte. It's selective. Anytime you know it's too selective, you know there's no real integrity to it. There's no real genuineness to it. So, this is the real effort. The effort is to use democracy long enough for people, for all of those elders that still had that kind of sense of American patriotism and citizenship, for all of them to die. For all of those who used to watch William F. Buckley and Firing Line and JFK and some of those people who were on both sides of the aisle, but they had that intellectual gravitas and sense of what being American is, wait for them to die so we can introduce this new definition of democracy that really means all the institutions that sprang from that time period are too important to be challenged, to be threatened. And even in the best sense of democracy, all majorities aren't made equal or righteous. You can have an unrighteous and certainly unequaled majority. So I mean, we've just conceded these things. I can't tell you how many cuck people I see on TV or on social media, as men mostly, and I'm throwing most of it on you men, because it's easier to scare women. I mean, that's just a fact. I hope that's not sexist. It's easier to scare women. That's why that's why we created certain laws that prioritize the biological and strength differences between men and women. And we look down upon if a man even really raises his voice too loud to a woman, because the threat of violence is unequaled. It's disproportionate. It's not equally proportional. So women scare easier. So I understand, these liberal and Democrat women, referring to this catchphrase saying, a threat to our democracy. There are threats of democracy. But you men, you cuck men out there who, you ask, what are the policies? Why not Donald Trump? What is, oh, well, he's a threat to our democracy. Shut the fuck up. Don't shut the fuck up. What you're basically saying is, no matter how corrupt the society is, no matter how corrupt the culture is, if a Democratic majority votes on it, then the rest of us should all just go down with the ship. And not only should we go down with the ship, because, part of being an American citizen and signing on to this thing we call America, part of it is that you do have to kind of concede to the process of the political system. I'm not saying we don't. But what I'm saying is, nowhere in our American founding values, nowhere in our foundations, in our heritage, in our culture, nowhere does it say I have to go down with a burning ship and act happy about it or not speak up about it. In fact, if there's one cornerstone of American citizenship, the idea of being American, is that if a Democratic majority does decide on its own destruction, if it has a self-destructive will, that the very least that the minority gets to do is protest, is question, to protect the rights of the minority. This is the gaffe that gets told about the civil rights movement. Oh, I'm sorry, not the civil rights movement, the Civil War. Actually, the slave owners were the minority. Black people weren't the minority. They were the racial minority, but the slave owners were the super minority. And what they were fighting for, in a sense, was to protect the rights of the minority, to say, just because we're the minority doesn't mean that we have to do what everybody else says. And that's part of the reason why states being the level at which state and local government being the level of some of these laws is so important. So we don't get these full sweeping sort of false democratic, rules. This mob rule from the federal government. So these things used to be kind of readily understood, and now the public education system is so fucked three ways to Sunday. You can't even have these conversations with people. They don't even know what you're talking about. They go glossy eyed. I'm sure I lost some people at like 40 minutes. They don't even have the intellectual rigor to stay involved in a conversation long enough to get to to get down to the bone. And thus, where we are today. Tim Walz, a great guy, real great guy. Yeah, give him the nuclear quote. You give him the nuclear quotes. Great. Way to go. Way to go, guys. This has been another episode of Please Call Me Crazy, brought to you by Free People Radio and powered by our favorite sponsor, TireGet.com. That's TireGet.com. You have to buy tires from somebody. You might as well buy them from us at TireGet.com. We believe in the freedom of movement. That's exactly what the establishment wants to take from you now. I'm your host, Royce White. This has been another episode, episode 217, October 2nd, year of our Lord 2024. We look forward to seeing you this Friday for Hebrews, Saturday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on Real America's Voice for the Royce White Show. And I may, in fact, be hosting War Room as well. So stay tuned for that. Stay tuned for the new weekly format of the podcast, as well as some new branding and intro videos and some other things that we're adding in to try and make it a little bit more colorful, a little bit more fun, as best we can. The stuff we're talking about here, this shit ain't fun. It's not fun. It's not fun to govern. It's not fun to actually try and figure out what the problems are in your society or your culture or your political system and come up with solutions and make changes. That shit hurts. It's difficult. But it's part of it. It's a necessary part of it. And people got to be committed and disciplined and willing to sacrifice that to achieve those things, or you live in tyranny. That's just what it is. I appreciate the time, obviously. I appreciate you being here. We appreciate your viewership and listenership today and in the future. The fight continues. As always, Godspeed.